You know what's more entertaining than a reality TV show? Watching GB news presenters try to have a civilized debate about the economy. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, where today we're unpacking what can only be described as the moment GB News viewers collectively lost their minds over a newspaper review that went completely off the rails. We've got heated arguments about Rachel Reeves, claims that Britain is getting better that went down like a lead balloon, and viewers so furious they literally switched channels mid-broadcast. Grab your popcorn because this is going to be an absolute ride. So let's set the scene. It's Monday morning, December 22nd, and Eamonn Holmes and Ellie Costello are back on GB News doing what they do best, reviewing the papers. Sounds harmless enough, right? Just a nice little chat about the headlines, bit of banter, move on with your day. Except this time, they've got political commentator Scarlett Maguire and broadcaster Mike Parry in the studio, and those two are about as likely to agree on economic policy as cats and dogs are to form a book club. This was a disaster waiting to happen, and happen it absolutely did. Eamonn kicks things off by reading from The Guardian's front page, which apparently says that Keir Starmer has no coherent plan for social mobility. Now, for anyone who's been paying attention to Labour's first few months in government, this probably isn't shocking news. But Scarlett Maguire jumps in and calls it a really important story, which is when things start getting interesting. She starts talking about NEETs, which for anyone not drowning in policy jargon, stands for not in employment, education, or training. Basically, young people who aren't doing anything productive, and yes, that is the actual official term. Only the government could come up with an acronym that makes unemployed youth sound like a quirky indie band. Scarlett explains that there's now an absolute guarantee that if you're young and unemployed for 18 months, you'll be given a placement. Which sounds great on paper, doesn't it? Like, oh brilliant, we're sorting out youth unemployment, gold star for everyone. But then Ellie Costello throws in the reality check that absolutely nobody asked for, but everyone needed to hear. She points out that the government isn't making it easy for employers to hire young people because young people are expensive. And honestly, she's not wrong. That's when Mike Parry absolutely erupts. And I mean erupts. He's off like a rocket, pointing out that this isn't joined-up government thinking, which is political speak for nobody in charge has a clue what they're doing. Mike's argument is pretty straightforward. On one hand, Rachel Reeves is supposedly trying to get young people into work, but on the other, she's piling taxes on businesses so high that they can't afford to hire anyone in the first place. He mentions pubs closing down, Saturday jobs disappearing, basically the entire entry-level employment market collapsing under the weight of tax increases. And you know what? That's a fair point. You can't simultaneously tax businesses into oblivion and then act surprised when they stop hiring. Now, here's where it gets properly spicy, because while Mike's going off about how the economy's in the toilet and young people can't get jobs, Scarlett Maguire decides this is the perfect moment to claim that Britain is getting better. Just Britain is getting better, full stop. As if that's a completely uncontroversial statement that everyone's going to nod along with. Narrator, they did not nod along with it. The GB News viewers absolutely lost it. And I mean lost it. Social media went into meltdown faster than you can say cost of living crisis. One viewer fumed, and I quote, "Is Scarlett on the same planet as the rest of us? Obviously not." Another announced they'd switched to Talk TV for some sensible talking, which is basically the TV equivalent of rage quitting a video game. Someone else called Scarlett a pathological liar, which is pretty harsh, but also gives you a sense of just how angry people were. These aren't just mild disagreements. These are people genuinely furious that someone would dare suggest things are improving when their lived experience is the complete opposite. One particularly angry viewer who owns a small business pointed out that this has been their worst year in 7 years, specifically because of what they called this backwards government. And that's the thing about economic debates, isn't it? You can throw around all the statistics and growth figures you want, but if regular people aren't feeling it in their wallets, those numbers mean absolutely nothing. You can't tell someone their business is thriving when they're struggling to pay the bills. You can't tell someone unemployment's falling when they've been job hunting for months. The disconnect between what politicians and commentators say and what real people experience is absolutely vast, and moments like this just highlight it in the most painful way possible. But let's get back to the studio chaos, because Mike Parry wasn't done. Oh no, he was just getting started. He went after Keir Starmer directly, claiming that all Starmer does is bounce from one side to the other, floating in the wind, trying to appease whatever lobby group is shouting the loudest at any given moment. According to Mike, Starmer doesn't have any coherent policy except keeping himself in number 10 as long as possible, which, brutal as it is, kind of tracks with what we've seen so far. One minute Labour's talking tough on immigration, the next they're softening their stance. One minute they're courting business, the next they're hiking taxes. It's political whiplash, and voters are getting dizzy trying to keep up. Scarlett tried to push back again, repeating her claim that yes, we were in dire problems, but we are getting better. And Mike just laughed. Actually laughed at her, which is probably the most devastating response you can give someone in a debate, because it's not even dignified disagreement, it's just pure dismissal. He flat out said we aren't getting better, and Scarlett fired back insisting that we are. And this is when Ellie Costello asked the absolute perfect question. By what metric do you think we're getting better? Because that's the question, isn't it? What are we measuring? What counts as better? Scarlett's answer is where things get really interesting, because she starts listing off these incremental improvements. She says we're slowly getting growth. Interest rates are slowly coming down from where they used to be. Slowly. That word's doing a lot of heavy lifting there, because yes, technically if something was absolutely abysmal and now it's only slightly less abysmal, that is technically improvement. But is it the kind of improvement that makes anyone feel better about their lives? Probably not. If your house is on fire and someone puts out one room, that's technically progress, but you're still standing in a burning house. Then Scarlett pivots to talking about what's being done for young people, listing nurseries expanding, breakfast clubs so kids can go to school having eaten, all this work being done for the young because apparently that's where it really matters. And look, nobody's going to argue that feeding hungry kids or expanding childcare is bad. Those are objectively good things. But here's the problem. You can't point to breakfast clubs as evidence that the economy is thriving. You just can't. Breakfast clubs exist because families can't afford to feed their children properly. That's not a sign of economic success. That's a sign that we've got such deep poverty that schools have to step in to make sure kids eat. It's papering over a massive crack, not fixing the foundation. The viewer reaction to all this was absolutely savage. One viewer claimed that all of Labour's achievements that Scarlett listed are just gerrymandering freebies for votes that working people have to pay for. They listed increased benefits, free meals, giving 16-year-olds to vote, paying for young people to go to Europe, basically arguing that Labour's just buying votes with taxpayer money. Now, you can debate whether that's fair or not, but it's certainly a view that resonates with a lot of people who feel like they're working hard, paying taxes, and watching that money get spent on everyone except them. Another viewer said that after watching Scarlett, they were now bad-tempered and sarcastically thanked GB News for that, which is kind of hilarious because imagine being so wound up by a morning TV debate that you have to go online and tell everyone about your ruined mood. But that's the state of political discourse right now. People aren't just disagreed, they're viscerally angry. They feel unheard, they feel ignored, and when they see someone on TV claiming things are getting better when their personal experience screams otherwise, that anger just explodes. Let's talk about Rachel Reeves for a minute, because she's absolutely central to this entire argument and she wasn't even in the studio. Reeves, as chancellor, has been piling on tax increases left, right, and center. National insurance hikes for employers, changes to business rates, all these things that are supposed to fill the supposed black hole in the public finances. The problem is, when you tax businesses harder, they don't just magically absorb those costs. They pass them on to consumers through higher prices, or they cut costs by reducing staff or not hiring new people. It's basic economics, and yet the government seems genuinely surprised that their tax rises are having consequences. Mike Parry's point about pubs closing down is actually really telling. Pubs have traditionally been where young people get their first jobs. Bar work, glass collecting, kitchen porter positions. These are entry-level roles that teach you how to work, how to deal with customers, how to show up on time and be responsible. When those venues close because they can't afford the tax burden, those jobs disappear, and young people lose that crucial first step on the employment ladder. Then the government wonders why youth unemployment is a problem and tries to solve it with 18-month placement guarantees, which is treating the symptom rather than the disease. The fundamental disconnect here is between macro-level policy thinking and micro-level reality. At macro level, yes, maybe GDP is ticking up slightly, maybe inflation is coming down a bit, maybe interest rates are marginally lower than they used to be. But at micro level, individuals are struggling. Small businesses are having their worst years in nearly a decade. People can't afford to heat their homes properly. Families are relying on breakfast clubs to feed their children. Those two realities can coexist, but when politicians and commentators only talk about the macro stuff, it feels like gaslighting to everyone experiencing the micro stuff. What made this GB News segment so explosive is that it crystallized that divide perfectly. You had Scarlett Maguire speaking the language of government talking points and incremental statistics, and you had Mike Parry speaking the language of pubs closing down and jobs disappearing, and never the twain shall meet. And the viewers who are living through the reality of the current economy sided overwhelmingly with Mike, because his version matched their experience. Scarlett's version sounded like it was describing a completely different country. There's also something deeper going on here about trust. People don't trust that the government has their interests at heart anymore. When Scarlett lists all these initiatives for young people, instead of thinking, oh good, they're trying to help, people think, what's the catch, or who's paying for this? That's a devastating loss of faith in government, and it's not something you fix with policy announcements. It's a cultural shift, and labor is absolutely bleeding from it. The fact that viewers were switching channels mid-debate is particularly telling. These are people who tuned into GB News specifically because they wanted a certain type of political coverage, presumably more skeptical of the mainstream consensus, and even they couldn't handle